I was in my front yard with my two kids, Mason and Emma, building what had to be the most epic igloo suburban Colorado had ever seen when I heard the crunch of expensive boots on snow behind me. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you are doing?" The voice was sharp enough to cut through the January cold. I turned around to find a woman in her late 40s standing at the edge of my property, wearing a designer parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Building an igloo with my kids," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. Mason, who was 7, peeked out from behind the snow structure we had been working on all morning. Emma, at 5, continued packing snow blocks, completely oblivious to the interruption. "I am Patricia Henderson, president of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, as if I should be impressed. "And this structure violates at least 3 sections of our community guidelines." I stood up, brushing snow off my jeans. "It is a pile of snow. It will melt in a week." According to Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws, any structure, temporary or permanent, visible from the street requires prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, Patricia said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what I assumed was a digital copy of the rules. "You also have children playing in your front yard without proper safety barriers, and your current activity is creating what could be considered an attractive nuisance." "It is literally snow," I repeated, feeling my patience already wearing thin. "My kids are playing outside, in our own yard." "The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Barrett," she said, her tone suggesting she dealt with unreasonable people like me all the time. "They maintain property values and ensure our neighborhood remains attractive and safe. I am going to have to ask you to dismantle this immediately." Emma finally looked up, her little face crumbling. "But Daddy, we have been working on it all morning." "I know, sweetheart," I said, then turned back to Patricia. "Look, we will be done in an hour or two. The kids are having fun. It is harmless." Patricia's expression hardened. "If you do not comply voluntarily, I will have no choice but to take further action. Consider this your formal warning." She turned on her heel and marched back toward the street, her boots leaving crisp imprints in the snow. "Is the mean lady going to make us stop?" Mason asked, his voice small. "No, buddy. We are going to finish our igloo," I said, more determined now than I had been before Patricia showed up. We spent another hour working on it, and I have to admit, the kids and I created something pretty impressive. It was about 5 feet tall, with a tunnel entrance and enough space inside for both kids to sit comfortably. Emma insisted we needed a flag on top, so we stuck a small American flag on a stick into the snow roof. I was inside the kitchen making hot chocolate when I saw the police cruiser pull up in front of my house. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, watching as 2 officers got out of the car. Patricia was with them, gesturing animatedly toward my front yard. I walked outside, leaving the hot chocolate on the counter. The officers looked about as thrilled to be there as I was to see them. "Sir, I am Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen," the taller one said. "We received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property." "It is an igloo," I said flatly, "made of snow by children." Officer Chen, a younger woman who looked like she was trying not to laugh, walked over to examine our creation. "It is a pretty good igloo," she admitted. "That is not the point," Patricia interjected. He was warned about the violation and refused to comply. The HOA has authority to enforce community standards, and when residents refuse to cooperate, we have every right to involve law enforcement. Officer Rodriguez sighed. "Madam, with all due respect, this is not really a police matter. It is snow. Are you refusing to enforce the law?" Patricia demanded, her face reddening. "There is no law being broken here," Officer Rodriguez said patiently. "HOA disputes are civil matters. You would need to go through your association's enforcement procedures." Patricia looked like she was about to explode. "I know the mayor personally. I know the chief of police. This is exactly the kind of disregard for community standards that leads to neighborhood decay." Officer Chen actually did laugh at that, though she tried to cover it with a cough. "Sir, you are not breaking any laws. We recommend you familiarize yourself with your HOA rules to avoid future conflicts, but there is nothing we can do here today." After the officers left, Patricia stood on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear. I could not hear what she was saying, but from her aggressive hand gestures, I could tell she was not happy. The rest of the day was peaceful. The kids played in and around the igloo until dinner time, and I figured that would be the end of it. Patricia would huff and puff, maybe send a nasty letter, and life would go on. I should have known better. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Inside was a formal notice from the Mountain View Estates HOA, informing me that I was being fined $500 for my violation. Additionally, the letter stated that I had 48 hours to remove the unauthorized structure or face additional daily fines of $100. $500, I said out loud, staring at the letter in disbelief. "For an igloo," my wife Deanna looked over my shoulder at the notice. "Can they actually do this?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I need to look at the HOA documents from when we bought the house." That evening, after the kids were in bed, I dug through our filing cabinet until I found the thick folder of paperwork from our home purchase 3 years ago. Buried in the stack was the HOA covenant, conditions and restrictions, a document so dense and boring that I had never actually read it all the way through. I started reading, and the more I read, the more irritated I became. There were rules about everything. What colors you could paint your house, what kind of mailbox you could have, where you could park your car, what time you could take your trash cans to the curb. And yes, apparently any structure required approval, though the definition of structure was vague enough to be meaningless. "This is insane," I told Deanna. "According to this, I would need permission to put up a tent for a birthday party. Can we fight it?" she asked. "I do not know. Maybe, but it would probably cost more in legal fees than just paying the fine." That should have been the end of it. Pay the stupid fine, let the igloo melt naturally over the next week, and move on with life. But something about the whole situation stuck in my craw. The look on Emma's face when Patricia told us to stop, the smug satisfaction in Patricia's voice when she called the cops. The principle of the thing. I decided to do some research. Over the next few days, I started digging into the HOA's history and structure. I learned that Mountain View Estates had been developed in the early 1990s by a company called Summit Properties. The HOA was established to maintain common areas, including a small park, walking trails, and a sledding hill that had become a popular spot for neighborhood kids in the winter. That sledding hill was actually the reason we had bought our house in this neighborhood. It was about 2 acres of perfect slope, maintained by the HOA with a warming hut at the bottom. Mason and Emma loved it there. I also learned that Patricia Henderson had been HOA president for 6 years, having run unopposed in every election. According to the meeting minutes I found online, attendance at HOA meetings was usually just Patricia and 2 board members, both of whom seemed to agree with everything she said. The more I dug, the more interesting things became. I found complaints from other homeowners, all similar to mine. Excessive fines for minor or questionable violations, aggressive enforcement of ambiguous rules, and a general atmosphere of intimidation. One homeowner had been fined for having the wrong shade of tan paint on their house. Another had been fined because their lawn was a quarter-inch too long. A third had been fined for parking their truck in their own driveway because it was considered a commercial vehicle. Even though it was just a regular pickup truck the guy used to commute to his construction job. But here is where it got really interesting. While I was searching through county property records for something else entirely, I stumbled across something that made me sit up straight in my chair: the Sledding Hill, the one owned and maintained by the HOA. According to the records I was looking at, that was not quite accurate. I spent 3 more days verifying what I had found, cross-referencing multiple sources, and even driving to the county recorder's office to look at original documents. Turns out, when Summit Properties developed Mountain View Estates, they had planned to include the Sledding Hill as HOA common property. But there had been a surveying error during the original platting process. The land that everyone assumed was part of the HOA common area was actually a separate parcel that had never been properly transferred. When Summit Properties went bankrupt in 1998, their assets were liquidated. Most of the land went to various buyers, but some parcels fell through the cracks. The Sledding Hill was one of them. In 2003, the county had auctioned off abandoned and tax-delinquent properties. The Sledding Hill, still unclaimed and with years of back taxes owed, was sold to the highest bidder for $8,000. That buyer was a man named Harold Barrett. My grandfather. I sat in my home office, staring at the property deed with my grandfather's signature on it. He had died in 2011, and I inherited his estate. It had not been much: some savings bonds, an old truck, and apparently a 2-acre sledding hill that I had no idea I owned. "Deanna," I called out, "you need to see this." She came into the office and I explained what I had found. Her eyes got wider with each detail. "So you are telling me that the Sledding Hill everyone uses, the one the HOA claims to maintain, is actually your property?" she asked. "Our property," I corrected, "and has been for almost 4 years, except we did not know it." "Does the HOA know?" "I do not think so. I think everyone has just assumed it was common property for so long that nobody ever checked." Deanna started laughing. "Oh, this is too perfect. Patricia finds you over an Igloo, and it turns out you own the most popular amenity in the neighborhood." "I need to verify this with a real estate attorney," I said. "Make sure I am reading this right. But if I am, this changes everything." I called a real estate attorney named Jennifer Walsh the next morning. I had used her when we bought our house, and she was sharp and thorough. I explained the situation and emailed her copies of all the documents I had found. She called me back 2 hours later. "Vincent, this is fascinating," Jennifer said. "I have gone through everything you sent me, and unless I am missing something, you are correct. You own that land free and clear. The HOA has no legal claim to it." "How is it possible nobody noticed this before?" I asked. "These things happen more often than you would think," she explained. "Especially with older developments where the original developer went bankrupt. Papers get misfiled, assumptions get made, and if nobody complains, the status quo continues." The HOA has probably been maintaining that land and treating it as common property for decades without ever verifying ownership. So what are my options here? Well, legally, you could do whatever you want with it. It is your property. You could sell it, develop it, fence it off. But I am guessing from your tone that you have something more specific in mind. Patricia Henderson has been harassing me over a snow igloo. She called the cops on me. She is fining me $500. I want to know what leverage this gives me. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I could send a letter to the HOA on your behalf. informing them of the ownership situation and demanding they cease any use of your property. That would certainly get their attention. Do it, I said. And make it clear that I am willing to discuss the situation, but only after they drop all fines and violations against me. I will draft something today, Jennifer said. This should be interesting. The letter went out on Friday afternoon. Jennifer sent its certified mail to the HOA's registered agent, which turned out to be Patricia Henderson herself. I did not have to wait long for a response. Saturday morning, I was having coffee when I saw Patricia marching up my driveway, waving a piece of paper. I opened the door before she could knock. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, thrusting the letter at me. "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said calmly. "I see you got my attorney's letter. This is absurd. That land has been HOA property since the development was built. This is some kind of scam." "It is not a scam. It is a property deed, legally recorded with the county. My grandfather bought that land at auction in 2003, and I inherited it when he died. If you do not believe me, you can verify it yourself with the county recorder." Patricia's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "You cannot do this. That Sledding Hill is a community amenity. Children use it. Families use it." "I am aware. I use it with my kids, and I have no problem with people continuing to use it. But here is the thing, Patricia. You called the cops on me for building an igloo with my children. You are fining me $500 for playing in my own yard. So now we are going to have a conversation about what happens next. Are you threatening to take away the Sledding Hill?" Her voice was shrill now. "I am saying that we need to come to an understanding. Drop the fines. Stop harassing me about the igloo, and we can work out an arrangement where the community can continue using the hill. You cannot just shut down the Sledding Hill. People have been using it for 30 years. "Actually, I can. It is my property. But like I said, I do not want to. I just want you to back off and leave me alone." Patricia looked like she was going to argue more, but then her expression changed. "I need to consult with the HOA board and our attorney." "You do that," I said. "But until those fines are dropped, nobody uses the Sledding Hill. As of right now, it is closed." I closed the door before she could respond. Diana had been listening from the kitchen. "Did you just shut down the Sledding Hill?" "Temporarily," I said. "I need them to take this seriously. The kids are going to be upset. I will explain it to them, and it will be open again soon once Patricia realizes she cannot bully people." I spent the rest of Saturday putting up temporary fencing and private property no trespassing signs around the Sledding Hill. It was not a fun job, but it needed to be done. Several neighbors stopped to ask what was going on, and I politely explained that there was a property dispute being worked out with the HOA. By Sunday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Other neighbors, people I barely knew, were calling to ask about the Sledding Hill. Some were angry, demanding to know why I was taking away a community resource. Others were confused. A few actually thanked me, having heard through the neighborhood grapevine about my issues with Patricia and expressing hope that someone was finally standing up to her. The most interesting call came from a man named Richard Novick, who lived 2 streets over. "Vincent, this is Richard Novick. We met at the neighborhood barbecue last summer." "Sure, I remember," I said, though I only vaguely recalled him. "Listen, I heard what is going on with Patricia and the HOA. I want you to know you have my full support. That woman has been a tyrant for years, and it is about time someone challenged her." "I appreciate that," I said. "I am serious. A bunch of us have been talking about trying to vote her out, but she has made it nearly impossible. She schedules meetings at weird times with minimal notice. She controls the proxy votes, and she has made it clear that anyone who opposes her will face retaliation through selective enforcement of the rules. That sounds like it might be illegal, I said. Probably. But most people do not want to spend thousands on an attorney to fight over HOA politics. It is easier to just keep your head down and avoid getting on her bad side. This gave me an idea. Richard, how many people would you say are unhappy with how Patricia runs the HOA? Hard to say. Maybe 30 or 40 households. There are about 120 homes in the development. That is enough, I said. Tell everyone you know who is unhappy with the current board to show up at the next HOA meeting. There is not one scheduled for 2 months. Then we call an emergency meeting. According to Colorado law, homeowners have the right to call special meetings if they follow proper procedures. I will have my attorney draft the notice. Richard was quiet for a moment. You are really doing this? Patricia called the cops on me for building an igloo with my kids. Yeah, I am really doing this. Monday morning, I was back on the phone with Jennifer Walsh. You have been busy, she said when I explained what I wanted to do. Can we legally call an emergency meeting? I asked. Yes, if you follow the procedures in the HOA bylaws. Usually it requires a petition signed by a certain percentage of homeowners. Let me pull up your HOA documents. There was a pause while she reviewed the files. Okay, according to your bylaws, any 20% of homeowners can petition for a special meeting. That would be 24 households in your community. The petition has to be submitted to the board in writing, and the board has to schedule the meeting within 30 days. Can you draft a petition for me? Absolutely. What is the purpose of the meeting? I want to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board and hold elections for new officers. Jennifer laughed. You are not messing around. I am tired of being pushed around over nonsense. Over the next week, Richard and I worked together to gather signatures. It was easier than I expected. Once people heard that someone was actually challenging Patricia, they came out of the woodwork with their own horror stories. A woman named Susan told me Patricia had fined her $2,000 because her rose bushes were planted 6 inches closer to the property line than allowed. When Susan pointed out that the bushes had been there when she bought the house, Patricia told her that was her problem. A retired couple, the Martins, had been fined for having a decorative garden gnome visible from the street. Patricia claimed it violated the rule against unsightly lawn ornaments. A single father named Tom had been threatened with legal action because he installed a basketball hoop in his driveway without HOA approval. He eventually removed it just to avoid the hassle. We got 37 signatures in 5 days. Jennifer submitted the petition to Patricia on Thursday. According to the bylaws, the meeting had to be scheduled within 30 days, but Jennifer pushed for it to happen sooner, arguing that the matter was urgent and affecting the entire community. Patricia tried to delay, but Jennifer was relentless. She pointed out that the Sledding Hill situation needed to be resolved quickly, and that as a significant stakeholder in community affairs, I had the right to address the membership. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning to be held at the community clubhouse. That Saturday, Deanna and I arrived at the clubhouse at 9:45. The parking lot was already full, and people were standing outside talking in groups. I recognized many faces, but there were also plenty of neighbors I had never met. Inside, the meeting room was packed. Every chair was taken and people lined the walls. I estimated about 70 or 80 people, which was apparently unprecedented for an HOA meeting. Patricia stood at the front of the room with the 2 other board members, both looking nervous. Patricia, however, looked defiant. At exactly 10 o'clock, Patricia called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table. This emergency meeting of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association has been called to order, she said, her voice tight. Before we begin, I want to state for the record that this meeting was called under irregular circumstances, and the current board questions its validity. Jennifer, sitting next to me, stood up. Point of order. The meeting was called in full compliance with the bylaws, as verified by the association's own rules. If you wish to challenge its validity, that itself would require a motion and a vote. Patricia glared at her. And you are Jennifer Walsh, attorney representing Vincent Barrett. Of course, Patricia said acidly. Well, since we are here, let us proceed. The floor is open for discussion. I stood up. I want to address the situation with the Sledding Hill and my ongoing dispute with the HOA board. You mean your attempt to hold community property hostage? Patricia shot back. It is not community property, I said calmly. As I believe you now know, having had time to verify the property records, that land is privately owned, by me. A murmur went through the crowd. Apparently not everyone had heard the full story. I continued. I inherited that property from my grandfather, who purchased it legally at a county auction in 2003. The HOA has been using it under the mistaken assumption that it was common property, but that was never actually the case. This is ridiculous, Patricia interrupted. That land has been used by the community for decades. You cannot just take it away. I do not want to take it away, I said, my voice rising slightly. I called this meeting to propose a solution that works for everyone. I am willing to grant the HOA an easement to use the Sledding Hill as a community amenity. In exchange, I want all fines and violations against me dropped immediately, and I want a formal apology for the harassment I have endured. Harassment? Patricia's voice was incredulous. You violated clearly stated HOA rules, and when asked to comply, you retaliated by trying to take away the Sledding Hill. I built an igloo with my children, I said, and I could hear my voice getting emotional now. In my own front yard, on my own property, and you called the police on me. You tried to fine me $500 for playing in the snow with my kids. That is not reasonable enforcement of community standards. That is a power trip. The room erupted in conversation. Several people started shouting agreement, others were arguing, and Patricia was banging her gavel trying to restore order. Enough, she shouted. Mr. Barrett, you can make whatever accusations you want, but the fact remains that rules are rules. If you do not like them, you should not have bought a house in an HOA community. Richard stood up from his seat across the room. Patricia, I have lived here for 12 years, and in that time I have watched you turn this HOA into your personal fiefdom. You selectively enforce rules against people you do not like while ignoring violations by your friends. You have used fines as a weapon to punish anyone who questions you. And you have made it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge your authority by manipulating the meeting schedules and proxy votes. That is slander, Patricia said, but her face had gone pale. It is not slander if it is true, Susan said, standing up. You fined me $2,000 over rose bushes that were planted before I even owned my house. When I tried to appeal, you refused to schedule a hearing for 6 months. More people started standing, each with their own story. The meeting devolved into chaos, with everyone trying to talk at once. Jennifer stood, and her voice cut through the noise. May I suggest we follow proper parliamentary procedure? I move that the membership vote on whether to accept Mr. Barrett's proposal regarding the Sledding Hill easement. Second, Richard called out. Patricia looked flustered. We need time to review any legal documents. This cannot be decided in a single meeting. Why not? I asked. The terms are simple. Drop the fines against me. issue a formal apology, and I grant a permanent easement allowing the HOA and community members to use the sledding hill. If you reject this offer, I will fence the property and prohibit all access. Your choice." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but one of the other board members, a man named Carl, put his hand on her arm. "Patricia, can we have a board consultation?" he asked quietly. The 3 board members huddled at the front table, speaking in low voices. It was clear that Carl and the 3rd board member, a woman named Helen, were trying to convince Patricia to accept the deal. After about 5 minutes, Patricia straightened up and addressed the room. "The board has decided to accept Mr. Barrett's proposal, pending review of the easement documents by our attorney." "And the apology?" I pressed. Patricia looked like she had bitten into a lemon. "The Mountain View Estates HOA regrets any misunderstanding regarding the Igloo incident." "That is not an apology," Jennifer said. "That is a non-apology. Try again." Patricia's hands were clenched into fists on the table. "Fine. The board apologizes for the manner in which the Igloo violation was handled. The fine is dropped. It was not gracious, but it would do." "Thank you," I said. "Jennifer will work with your attorney to draft the easement agreement. Now, I believe there was another matter on the agenda. A vote of no confidence in the current board." Patricia's face went white. "That was not part of the deal." "The deal was about the sledding hill," I said. "This is a separate matter, raised by multiple community members who feel the HOA has been poorly managed." What followed was 3 hours of intense debate, parliamentary procedure, and voting. In the end, the membership voted to remove all 3 current board members and hold immediate elections for replacements. Richard was elected president. Susan became vice president. A man named David Chen, who worked as an accountant, became treasurer. The new board's first act was to announce a complete review of all fines issued in the past 2 years, and a commitment to revising the HOA bylaws to make them more reasonable. Patricia left the meeting without speaking to anyone, her face a mask of fury. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. Jennifer drafted the easement agreement, which was reviewed and approved by both parties. The sledding hill reopened, and I made sure to be there the first day with Mason and Emma. The new HOA board proved to be dramatically different from the old one. They refunded thousands of dollars in questionable fines. They revised the bylaws to require actual approval processes with clear standards instead of arbitrary decisions. They established regular meeting schedules that were actually convenient for working families. Patricia tried to cause trouble, of course. She sent angry letters to the new board, demanding they reverse the vote. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook page claiming the election had been illegitimate. She even filed a complaint with the county about the Sledding Hill easement, but it was quickly dismissed. But here is where things took a darker turn. About a month after the meeting, Richard called me sounding worried. "Vincent, we have been going through the HOA financial records and something does not add up." "What do you mean?" "David has been auditing the books, and there are some significant discrepancies. Money that should be in the reserve fund is not there. We are talking about almost $60,000. Where did it go?" "That is what we are trying to figure out." Patricia was the only one with direct access to the accounts. She always said she was keeping detailed records, but now that we are looking at those records, things do not match up. "You think she stole from the HOA?" "I do not want to jump to conclusions, but we might need to bring in a forensic accountant, and depending on what they find, we might need to involve the police." The HOA hired a forensic accountant named Michael Torres, who specialized in fraud investigations. It took him 3 weeks to untangle the financial records, but what he found was damning. Patricia had been systematically stealing from the HOA for at least 4 years. She would issue fines to homeowners, collect the payments, but only record a portion of them in the official books. She had also been inflating expenses for maintenance work, paying contractors for services that were never actually performed, and then splitting the excess with the contractors. In total, she had stolen approximately $73,000. Michael presented his findings to the new board, and they immediately voted to contact the police. Colorado takes HOA fraud seriously, and what Patricia had done was not just a civil matter. It was embezzlement. I was present when the police came to Patricia's house to arrest her. I had not planned to be there, but I was driving past and saw the patrol cars. I pulled over and watched from a distance. Patricia came out in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence, claiming the records were wrong, that there had been accounting errors, that she was being set up. But her protests fell on deaf ears. The case moved through the legal system over the following months. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried every trick in the book to get the charges dismissed or reduced, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband, who apparently had no idea what she had been doing, filed for divorce. The neighborhood slowly recovered. The reserve fund was replenished through a combination of insurance claims and Patricia's restitution payments. The new board proved to be fair and reasonable, actually working to improve the community instead of just collecting fines. The Sledding Hill became more popular than ever. The new board used some of the recovered funds to add better lighting and improve the warming hut. They organized community sledding events, and Mason and Emma became minor celebrities among the neighborhood kids as the children of the man who saved the Sledding Hill. As for the igloo that started it all, it melted in late January, just as I had predicted. But before it did, Emma insisted we take about 100 photos of it. One of those photos now hangs framed in our living room, a reminder of the day we stood up to a bully and discovered we had more power than we thought. The following winter, we built an even bigger igloo. This time, half the neighborhood kids helped, and nobody called the cops. I learned a lot from the whole experience. I learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it seems easier to just comply. I learned that bullies often fold when you actually challenge them. And I learned that you should always read your property documents carefully, because you never know what you might own. Most importantly, I learned that communities work best when people actually care about each other, instead of just enforcing arbitrary rules. The new HOA was not perfect, but it was run by people who actually wanted to make the neighborhood better, not just exert control over their neighbors. Patricia served 18 months of her sentence before being released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona to live with her sister. I have not seen or heard from her since. Sometimes on winter weekends, when I am at the Sledding Hill with my kids, I think about that day Patricia marched up to my house demanding I tear down our igloo. I think about how a simple act of playing with my children led to uncovering property records, organizing a community, and ultimately exposing fraud. Life is funny that way. You never know what is going to happen when you decide to stand your ground. Mason is 9 now, and Emma is 7. They still love the Sledding Hill, though they are getting more interested in actual skiing as they get older. We are planning a trip to Breckenridge next month. The other day, Emma came home from school excited about a project her class was doing about property rights and community organizing. Her teacher had asked if I would come speak to the class about our experience with the HOA. "Dad, will you come talk to my class?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "I already told everyone about how you saved the sledding hill." "I did not really save it," I said. "It was already ours. I just had to prove it." "That is the same thing," she insisted. "So next week, I will go talk to a classroom of second graders about HOAs and property deeds and standing up for what is right. I am not entirely sure how to make those topics interesting for 7-year-olds, but I will give it my shot. Deanna says I should write a book about the whole experience. Maybe someday I will. For now, I am content with the fact that our neighborhood is a better place than it was a year ago, and that my kids learned an important lesson about standing up to bullies. The Igloo incident, as it has come to be known in our family, changed a lot of things. It changed how our HOA operates. It changed how neighbors interact with each other. And it changed how I think about community involvement. I never set out to be some kind of neighborhood activist. I just wanted to build an igloo with my kids. But sometimes life pushes you into situations where you have to make a choice. Back down or stand up. I am glad I stood up. Richard and I have become good friends. We grab coffee every couple of weeks and talk about neighborhood issues, though things are much calmer now than they were a year ago. He told me recently that membership engagement with the HOA has increased dramatically. People actually show up to meetings now because they feel like their voices matter. The new board has implemented policies that make sense. Paint colors still need approval, but the standards are reasonable and the process is quick. Lawn maintenance is expected, but nobody is measuring grass height with a ruler. And temporary structures, like snow igloos, are explicitly allowed as long as they do not pose a safety hazard. I occasionally wonder if I was too hard on Patricia. Then, I remember the look on Emma's face when Patricia told us we could not finish our igloo, and I remember the $73,000 she stole from the community, and any sympathy evaporates. Some people should not have power over others. Patricia was one of those people. The sledding hill remains my favorite place in the neighborhood. On clear winter days, when the sun is shining and the snow is perfect, I take the kids there and we spend hours sledding, building snow forts, and just enjoying being outside. People sometimes thank me for keeping the hill accessible. I always tell them the same thing. It was never about keeping it from the community. It was about making sure one person could not abuse their power to make everyone else miserable. Property rights matter. Community matters. And sometimes those two things intersect in unexpected ways. Last month, we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the easement agreement with a big neighborhood party at the Sledding Hill. The new board organized it, complete with hot chocolate, cookies, and a bonfire in the fire pit they had built with some of the recovered funds. Almost everyone in the neighborhood showed up. Kids were sledding, adults were chatting and laughing, and there was a real sense of community that I had not felt before all this happened. Mason and Emma spent the entire afternoon sledding with their friends, coming back to the bonfire every so often to warm up and grab more cookies. Watching them, seeing how happy they were, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why we had moved to this neighborhood in the first place. Not for an HOA that measured grass length and banned garden gnomes, but for the parks and the hill and the chance for our kids to grow up in a place where they could play outside and be part of a real community. Jennifer Walsh came to the party too. We talked for a while about how unusual the whole situation had been. In 20 years of practicing real estate law, I have never seen anything quite like this, she told me. The property ownership issue was bizarre enough, but the fraud investigation on top of it, that is wild. Do you think Patricia would have been caught if this had not all blown up? I asked. Jennifer shrugged. Eventually, maybe. but it could have been years. HOA boards often operate with very little oversight. If nobody is paying attention, it is surprisingly easy to embezzle funds. That is terrifying. It is. But the good news is that your community is paying attention now. That is the best defense against this kind of thing happening again. As the sun started to set and families began heading home, I stood at the top of the Sledding hill looking down at the neighborhood. From up here, I could see dozens of houses, each one representing a family, a story, a life. This was my community. These were my neighbors, and while I had not chosen to become the person who challenged the HOA and exposed corruption, I was glad it had happened. The Igloo was long gone, melted away a year ago, but its impact remained. It had been the catalyst for real change, the spark that lit a fire under a complacent community. Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest consequences. A snow igloo built on a Saturday morning with 2 excited kids had somehow led to elections, investigations, arrests, and ultimately a better neighborhood for everyone. I would not change any of it. Well, maybe I would have built the igloo in the backyard if I had known what was coming. But then again, if I had done that, none of this would have happened. Patricia would still be running the HOA like her personal kingdom. The Sledding Hill ownership would still be unclear, and $73,000 of community funds would still be missing. No, I would not change it. As Deanna and I walked home that evening, kids running ahead of us, I felt genuinely happy. Not just content, but truly happy with where we lived and the community we were part of. You know, Deanna said, slipping her hand into mine, a year ago you were stressed out of your mind over all this. I was, I admitted. I thought we might have to move. I thought we had gotten into something way over our heads. And now I am glad it happened. Is that weird? A little, she said, smiling, but I get it. You made a difference. Not many people can say that. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in my home office looking at the property deed for the Sledding Hill, the same document that had started this whole chain of events. It was just a piece of paper, really. Legal language, stamps, signatures. But it represented something important. Proof of ownership, yes, but also proof that things are not always what they seem. Everyone had assumed the HOA owned the Sledding Hill. That assumption had gone unchallenged for decades. It took one annoying conflict over an igloo to make me dig deep enough to discover the truth. How many other assumptions do we live with? I wondered. How many things do we accept as fact without ever verifying them? It was a philosophical question, maybe too deep for a Saturday night, but it stuck with me. The next morning was Sunday, and I woke up to the sound of laughter outside. I looked out the window and saw several neighborhood kids playing in the street, building a snowman together. A year ago, that might have resulted in an HOA violation notice. Kids blocking the street, snowmen visible from public right-of-way. Some nonsense rule that existed only to give Patricia an excuse to exert control. Now it was just kids playing, as it should be. I went downstairs and made coffee, enjoying the quiet morning. Deanna was still asleep, and the kids would not be up for another hour or so. These were the moments I cherished, the quiet times between the chaos. The chance to reflect on everything that had happened and appreciate how far we had come. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Board meeting Tuesday night if you want to come. Nothing major, just routine stuff. I texted back that I would be there. Even though I was not on the board, I tried to attend meetings regularly. After everything that had happened, I felt a responsibility to stay engaged. The following Tuesday, I sat in on the HOA board meeting. It was remarkably boring, which was exactly how HOA meetings should be. They discussed routine maintenance schedules, approved a request to repaint a house a slightly different shade of blue, and reviewed the budget. No drama. No power trips. Just a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community. At the end of the meeting, Susan brought up a proposal to create a community garden on a small plot of HOA land near the clubhouse. "I think it would be great for bringing people together," she said. "Anyone who wants to participate could have a small plot to grow vegetables or flowers. It would be completely voluntary." The board discussed it briefly and approved the idea unanimously. They would send out a survey to gauge interest and start planning for spring planting. This was what an HOA should be, I thought. People working together to improve their community, not tearing each other down over petty violations. After the meeting, Richard pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," he said. "This neighborhood is completely different now. Better." "You were the one who organized everyone," I reminded him. "I just refused to back down about an igloo. You did more than that. You gave people permission to stand up. For years, everyone was afraid of Patricia. You showed us we did not have to be." "I got lucky with the property records," I said. "If my grandfather had not bought that land, none of this would have worked." "Maybe. But you were willing to dig, to research, to fight back. Most people would have just paid the fine and moved on." He was right about that. I easily could have paid $500 and let the whole thing drop. It would have been simpler, less stressful, and I would not have had to spend weeks dealing with lawyers and meetings and confrontation. But I would not have uncovered fraud. The Sledding Hill situation would still be unclear. Patricia would still be stealing from the community, and everyone would still be living in fear of arbitrary enforcement. Sometimes doing the right thing is not the easiest path, but it is still worth it. Spring came, and with it, the community garden project launched. Deanna and the kids were excited to have a plot, and we spent several weekends preparing soil and planting seeds. Tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and Emma's special request, strawberries. The garden became another gathering place for the neighborhood, somewhere people would run into each other and chat while tending their plants. It was amazing how much a simple shared project could bring people together. One Saturday in May, while I was watering our plot, an older man I did not recognize approached me. "You are Vincent Barrett, right?" he asked. "That is me. I am George Caldwell. I live over on Maple Street. I wanted to thank you for what you did with the HOA situation." "Oh, you are welcome." But really, a lot of people were involved. "Maybe so, but you were the one who started it. See, my wife has Alzheimer's. She likes to sit in the front yard and watch the birds. Last year, Patricia tried to fine us because my wife left some gardening tools out overnight. She called them an eyesore." His voice got thick with emotion. I tried to explain that my wife sometimes forgets things, that we were doing our best. Patricia said that was not her problem, and that if we could not maintain our property properly, maybe we should not live in an HOA community. I felt anger rising in my chest. "That is horrible." After you challenged her and everything came out, the new board reached out to us. They apologized for how we were treated and offered to help if we ever need anything. That kind of kindness, that compassion, that is what a community should be. We talked for a while longer, and I learned that George was not alone. There were dozens of stories like his. People who had been hurt or harassed by Patricia's reign, but had been too afraid or too tired to fight back. The ripple effects of standing up to her had been far greater than I had realized. That summer was the best one we had experienced since moving to the neighborhood. The community pool, another HOA amenity, was actually enjoyable now that there were not strict rules about everything. Kids could play and be kids without someone following them around looking for violations. Mason learned to swim that summer. Emma became obsessed with diving and spent hours practicing. Deanna and I would sit in the shade reading and occasionally jumping in to cool off. It was, in short, exactly what suburban life was supposed to be. In August, I got a call from a reporter at the local newspaper. She was writing a story about HOA reform and had heard about what happened in our neighborhood. I was hesitant at first. The whole situation felt very personal, and I was not sure I wanted it in the newspaper. But after talking to Deanna and Richard, I agreed to an interview. The article ran a week later under the headline, "How One Father's Igloo Led to HOA Reform." It told the whole story: the igloo, the fines, the Sledding Hill discovery, the fraud, Patricia's arrest, and the new community atmosphere. The article got picked up by a Denver television station, and suddenly I was doing interviews about HOA reform and property rights. It was surreal and uncomfortable, but also seemed important. State legislators reached out to ask about my experience. There was apparently a growing movement to reform HOA laws in Colorado to provide more protections for homeowners and more oversight of HOA boards. I testified before a state committee in September, telling my story and advocating for stronger regulations. I was not a natural public speaker, and I was nervous as hell, but I felt like I needed to do it. The committee was considering a bill that would require annual independent audits of HOA finances and establish clearer procedures for homeowners to challenge fines. It would also mandate that HOA meetings be scheduled at reasonable times and require boards to allow remote participation. The bill passed in November and was signed into law by the governor in December. It was not perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Deanna teased me about becoming an accidental activist. "Next you will be running for state legislature," she joked. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I've had my fill of politics and bureaucracy. I just want to go back to being a normal dad." "You saved a Sledding Hill and exposed an embezzler," she pointed out. "I think normal is not an option anymore." She had a point. That winter, we built another igloo. It was not as big as the first one, but it was solid and well constructed. And this time, when I saw Patricia Henderson's replacement as HOA vice president, a friendly woman named Karen Martinez, walking by, she stopped to admire it. "That is impressive," Karen said. "My kids would love something like that. Would you mind if I brought them over to see it later?" "Of course not," I said. "Bring them over any time." "Thanks. And just so you know, the board is putting together a winter activities guide for the neighborhood. Would you be willing to write a section about building snow structures safely?" "Sure, I can do that." That evening, as I was working on the guide, I thought about how much had changed. A year and a half ago, building an igloo got me threatened with fines and a police visit. Now the HOA was asking me to teach other families how to do it. It was a small thing, maybe, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the community operated. The Winter Activities Guide was published in January and distributed to every household. It included information about the Sledding Hill hours, skating on the pond when conditions allowed, safety tips for winter activities, and yes, a full page about building snow structures with your kids. Emma was thrilled to see her picture in the guide, posing in front of our igloo. Mason pretended not to care, but I caught him showing it to his friends. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, family, community involvement at a manageable level. I was still on the Property Rights Committee for the HOA, helping to review requests and make sure processes were fair and transparent. But it was not consuming my life anymore. Richard's term as HOA president was going well, and he was already being encouraged to run again when it expired. The community was stable, finances were in good shape, and people actually seemed to like living here. In March, I got a letter from Patricia's attorney. My stomach dropped when I saw the return address, worried that she was somehow trying to cause trouble from prison. But the letter was not hostile. It was a request for me to write a victim impact statement for her parole hearing. I stared at the letter for a long time, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to write something scathing, to make sure she stayed in prison for her full sentence. But another part of me felt like that would just be vindictive. I talked to Deanna about it. "What do you think you should do?" she asked. "I do not know. She stole from the community, she made people miserable, but she has already been in prison for over a year. I do not want to be the reason she stays there longer." "Then do not write anything," Deanna suggested. "You do not owe her anything, but you also do not need to go out of your way to hurt her more." In the end, I did not write a statement. I figured the justice system could make its own decisions without my input. Patricia was released on parole a month later, and as far as I know, she never returned to Colorado. Spring brought the community garden back to life. Our strawberries from last year had survived the winter, and new green shoots were appearing. Emma was ecstatic. The neighborhood had fully transformed. People knew each other. Kids played together. Families helped each other out. It was the kind of community I had always imagined but never quite experienced before. One evening in April, I was sitting on my front porch watching Mason and Emma play basketball in the driveway when Susan walked by with her dog. "Beautiful evening," she called out. "Sure is," I agreed. She paused at the end of my driveway. "You know, I was thinking the other day about how different things are now. Remember how tense everyone was a couple of years ago? How you could not even talk to your neighbors without worrying about HOA complaints? I remember. Now look at us. Kids playing, people actually talking to each other, community events that people want to attend. It is amazing what happens when you get rid of one toxic person." After she continued her walk, I thought about her words. It really had been one person causing most of the problems. Patricia had created an atmosphere of fear and resentment, and removing her had allowed the community's natural goodness to emerge. But it took someone standing up to her for that change to happen. And that someone happened to be me, completely by accident, all because I wanted to build an igloo with my kids. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just torn down the igloo when Patricia first complained. Would someone else have eventually challenged her? Would the fraud have been discovered? Or would things have continued the same way for years? I will never know. But I am glad I made the choice I did. The following winter, Mason was 10 and Emma was 8. They were getting older, developing their own interests, becoming more independent. But they still loved the sledding hill, and we still spent winter weekends there as a family. The igloo tradition continued. Each year we built one, sometimes inviting other families to help. It became a neighborhood thing, a signal that winter had truly arrived. And every time we built one, I thought about that first igloo, the one that changed everything. The one that led to police visits and property discoveries, and fraud investigations and community reform. All because I refused to back down when a bully told me I could not play in the snow with my kids. Years from now, when Mason and Emma are grown with families of their own, I hope they remember these winters. I hope they remember building igloos and sledding and being part of a real community. And I hope they remember that standing up for what is right, even in small things, can make a real difference. The igloo incident taught me that. It taught all of us that. And that lesson is worth more than any sledding hill, more than any property deed, more than any victory over an HOA tyrant. It is the lesson that ordinary people have power when they choose to use it, that communities work best when people care about each other, and that sometimes the most important battles start over the smallest things. like an igloo built on a snowy Saturday morning by a father and his two kids who just wanted to play outside.